0204 hours over the Pacific near Alaska. An F-16 from the United States was on patrol close to the edge of Alaska's airspace when it was picked up. Russia reacted at once, sending up two Su-35s to move in, tighten the space, and push the encounter dangerously close to escalation. What followed over the next few minutes was the kind of moment where even one small mistake could have changed the way both powers managed deterrence in the sky. This was international airspace near Alaska, one of those tense zones where the distance between stability and confrontation is as thin as the ice below. Low, heavy clouds cut visibility. Freezing air and an icy ocean make radar returns and radio calls far less reliable, almost like trying to read a reflection through a steamed-up mirror. And in conditions like these, Russia holds a local edge at the fighter level. The Su-35 brings thrust vectoring and extreme agility, letting it close distance with almost unreal freedom of movement, like a Porsche 911 Turbo S slipping through packed traffic without ever seeming to touch the brakes. Its powerful radar adds another layer of pressure, tracking from long range and giving American pilots the feeling that an unseen eye is fixed on them the entire time. On paper, the balance still looks even enough. The F-16 is famous for speed and agility of its own. But 5 minutes into a close-range engagement where the real test begins, the picture changes fast. The F-16 is no longer in its ideal environment. It was never built around old-school turning fights where pure physical maneuvering decides everything. In weather like this, any attempt to break away creates its own risk, because within seconds, radar disruption and electronic interference can throw the whole situation into confusion. Breaking this deadlock could mean the difference between a routine patrol and an incident serious enough to rattle NATO-Russia relations and affect millions far beyond the aircraft involved. At this level of the encounter, Russia appears to control the immediate tempo. The opening phase is a standoff, but one where Moscow holds the initiative and tries to make the other side play by its rules. But that is only the first layer of the game. US pilots understand that firing first would instantly raise the stakes, while running would only make them easier to pressure. So the first response is not force, it is discipline. The F-16 does not switch its radar into target lock mode. It stays in passive RWS, enough to track where these Su-35s are without crossing into something openly provocative. The aircraft stays on its published international route. Changing course now would look too much like fear, and that is exactly the reaction Russia wants to force. Then comes the key move. Link 16. This is not ordinary radio traffic. It is the U.S. real-time tactical data network. The position, speed, and behavior of both Su-35s are sent out in short digital bursts, brief enough to reduce the chances of being fully jammed. Behind the scenes, command centers begin stitching those fragments together. A clearer picture forms. The pincer is visible. The distance is shrinking. Even so, everyone is still boxed in by the rules of engagement. Russia has not switched into a clear attack lock. No missiles have been launched. Legally and operationally, there is still no basis to open fire. At the same time, Link 16 begins to suffer selective jamming. Delay increases. The two Su-35s push into a more dangerous range. Russia does not need to fire. It only needs to keep the pressure on long enough to force a mistake or to push the U.S. into a step it does not want to take. Moscow knows Washington is following the rules, and the F-16 does exactly that. It does not escalate. It does not fire. It does not run. It does not light the afterburner and bolt like a cornered aircraft. It holds course, holds speed, and quietly keeps passing data. From the outside, that can look passive. From the Pentagon's point of view, it is controlled escalation at its most precise. American pilots know that as long as they do not fire, the real decision-making power stays above them, not in the cockpit, but at the command level. And the longer that remains true, the more it benefits the United States. Within 10 minutes, the Su-35 crews begin to sense that something is off. The F-16 has not changed heading. Its radar has not gone into continuous scan. There is no public distress call. That can only mean one thing. The other side is trying to keep the encounter below the threshold of war, either waiting for Russia to tire and pull away, or for the U.S. to respond in a way Russia cannot control. So Russia turns up the pressure, but still carefully avoids crossing the rules of engagement line. The two Su-35s split. One slides in from behind and below, skimming through the F-16's wake and causing a slight shake in the American aircraft. The other stays higher, off the 2 to 3 o'clock position, holding radar pressure from a distance like an invisible hand resting on the opponent's shoulder. For Russia, this is intimidation. For the United States, it is live intelligence gathering. The F-16 pilot does not yank the stick to break away from the disturbance. He keeps corrections small and deliberate, letting the aircraft's automatic systems compensate cleanly while recording the aerodynamic effect of the Su-35 from different angles of approach. When the missile warning system sounds again and again, even though nothing has been launched, he does not react emotionally. He classifies the signal, measures the distance at which it activates, and logs the full radar behavior cycle of the opposing aircraft. Every second the Su-35 keeps applying pressure without firing is another second of exposure. And most importantly, neither Su-35 opens missile covers, activates seeker heads, or crosses NATO's engagement threshold. That is the irony of the moment. Russia believes it is operating safely inside the gray zone. In reality, that gray zone is where it becomes most vulnerable. Because even though the F-16 has lost immediate tactical freedom, the United States still holds strategic initiative. Russia is the one forced to stay close, burn fuel, strain nerves, and keep adjusting its position to maintain the threat. The US side only has to remain calm, collect information, and wait. In the cockpit view, the F-16 can look boxed in. On the wider board, Russia is the one locking itself into a trap. What the Su-35 crews do not fully see is that the American pilot is not staying steady because he is out of options. He is staying steady because he is seeing more than they realize. At 0230 hours south of Alaska, and at an altitude fighter jets cannot sustain for long, an airborne command platform is already recording every move. That picture is not coming from the F-16's nose radar. It is coming from the E-2D Hawkeye, a $357 million early warning aircraft operating far beyond visual range, beyond the assumptions of close-in fighter doctrine, and beyond the type of engagement the Su-35 is built to dominate. That price tag is not about weapons. It is about control. The E-2D's APY-9 radar does not just see farther. It is built for exactly this kind of environment. Low cloud cover, atmospheric interference, reflections from sea ice, and clutter from the ocean surface. The same conditions that force the Su-35's radar to keep recalibrating. From above, the Hawkeye filters real signals from false returns, tracks huge numbers of targets at once, and maintains a stable, shared tactical picture that frontline fighters cannot create by themselves. But radar range is only part of its value. The real strength of the E-2D is that it acts as the brain of the network. Every piece of information it gathers is fused, assessed, and sent back out to fighters, ships, and air defense systems supporting the mission. Once the Hawkeye is in the loop, the F-16 is no longer just protecting itself. It is carrying out the intent of an entire combat network. And in truth, the E-2D did not suddenly appear. It had already been ready from the moment the F-16 and Su-35s first crossed paths. If the F-16 is the piece in view, then the Hawkeye is the board that had been laid out from the start. That is when Russia runs into the most uncomfortable reality of all. It is no longer pressuring a lone pilot. It is revealing itself to a system designed specifically to avoid rushed reactions. The Su-35 can still push in aggressively. It can still dominate the visual space. But it cannot overpower an opponent that controls the timing from above. Russia brought a familiar tool: pressure and bluff. The United States answered with something far more valuable: time, data, and the ability to decide if the encounter goes any further. At close range, the Su-35 still holds the maneuvering advantage. But the North Pacific is not an air show. Cold air and low cloud force the Su-35 to rely more heavily on its radar to keep track of the target. The ocean surface and drifting ice disrupt the signal, forcing constant corrections and creating brief breaks in tracking. Russia can keep closing and keep applying pressure, but it cannot maintain a clean firing picture without exposing itself even more, which means getting closer to the escalation line. NATO is watching every second. Flying low helps the Su-35 create aerodynamic disturbance around the F-16. But it also traps the Russian jet in rough air above the sea, where radar returns and infrared signatures become unstable. Short bursts of power used to hold position make its heat signature fluctuate too much for a clean shot, while still making it easier to follow passively from a distance. So the closer the Su-35 gets, the more often it has to correct. The pressure rises, but the advantage does not. The United States didn't need to introduce new weapons into the situation. Instead, they stabilized the entire engagement. The F-16 stayed inside a carefully managed flight corridor, avoiding the worst zones of terrain reflection while holding a steady rhythm in the air. That rhythm forced the Su-35s to keep adjusting again and again without ever reaching a clean, usable firing condition. This wasn't a counterattack built on firepower. It was a counter built on control. Russia found itself in a difficult position. Pulling away too quickly would look like backing down. But tightening the pressure any further meant getting dangerously close to a line that could trigger serious consequences. The standoff locked into place. And in this kind of situation, the side that dictates the pace holds the real advantage. Time compressed. The tactical window dropped under 40 seconds. The distance between the F-16 and the nearest Su-35 shrank to less than 3 nautical miles. At that range, even a minor mistake could end in twisted metal. Inside the cockpit, radar warnings kept sounding, while the disturbed airflow from the Su-35 behind caused the F-16 to shake in ways the pilot never wanted to feel. Both sides understood something very clearly in that moment. Missiles weren't necessary. One overcorrection, one sudden burst of speed, or one wrong defensive move could turn a tense encounter into a catastrophe. And then the most logical outcome unfolded. No missiles, no collision. The two Su-35s began to disengage, but in a controlled, deliberate way. The trailing aircraft gained altitude and opened distance. The other reduced its angle and gradually turned back toward Russian airspace. There was no sharp brake, no dramatic acceleration. Radar remained active. Formation discipline stayed intact. It wasn't a retreat driven by weakness. It was a decision made because continuing no longer made sense. The reasoning behind it was simple and very calculated. Extend the encounter by another 20 or 30 seconds, and the risks would outweigh any benefit. The chance of a physical incident would rise sharply in low clouds and unstable air. The likelihood of triggering a justified defensive response from the US would increase. And perhaps most importantly, every extra second would leave behind a complete chain of data. Flight paths, speeds, radar behavior, heat signatures, all of it usable later as long-term evidence. The US side didn't try to capitalize on the moment either. The F-16 didn't chase, didn't accelerate, and didn't switch into attack mode. It stayed on its international route, held a steady speed, and kept sending information back to command. Because the priority wasn't to win the encounter in a visible way. The priority was safety, stability, and something quieter. Collecting real-world behavioral data from the Su-35 in a live scenario. At 0243 hours, there was no clear winner in the sky. But the balance had shifted. Russia didn't achieve what it set out to do. The F-16 didn't break formation, didn't run, and didn't escalate. Instead, Russia was the one that had to disengage from a situation it couldn't control. And that leads to the core takeaway. In modern air operations, the side that controls information can force the other side to stop without ever firing. Not because one aircraft is stronger than another, but because one side sees more, understands more, and turns every move of the opponent into a risk that simply isn't worth continuing. What may have surprised Russia the most was something they couldn't directly see: the presence of the E-2D Hawkeye, a naval aircraft already positioned in advance, quietly supporting what looked like a single Air Force fighter. In reality, that F-16 wasn't alone at all. It was operating as part of a fully integrated system stretching far beyond visual range. Of course, everything described here is a scenario, not a real-world incident. For Russia, this kind of approach would highlight limits rather than control, ending with a quiet disengagement. For the US and NATO, it would simply be another mission completed by the book, where discipline and coordination did exactly what they were designed to do. And if you were sitting in that F-16 cockpit in that moment, would you hold your course or choose a different move?